A rich man pushes a woman in the grocery store line. An ex-SEAL saw it, and his reaction shocked everyone. The fluorescent lights of Peterson's grocery hummed overhead, casting their familiar pale glow across the worn linoleum floors. It was a Thursday evening in late October, and the small supermarket in downtown Portland, Oregon, was experiencing its usual after-work rush. Shopping carts rattled down narrow aisles as tired workers grabbed dinner ingredients, and the smell of freshly baked bread from the bakery section mixed with the earthy scent of produce near the entrance. Marcus Thompson stood in line at Register 4, his weathered hands resting on the handle of a cart containing just a few items: a gallon of milk, a loaf of whole wheat bread, some eggs, and a small bag of apples. At 42 years old, Marcus carried himself with a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with his modest appearance. He wore faded jeans, a simple grey hoodie, and work boots that had seen better days. His dark skin bore the subtle marks of a life lived outdoors, and his closely cropped hair was beginning to show flecks of grey at the temples. What no one in that grocery store could have known, just by looking at him, was that Marcus Thompson had spent 18 years as a United States Navy SEAL. He had seen combat in Afghanistan, Iraq, and a dozen other places that would never appear on any official record. He had saved lives, taken lives, and carried the weight of both with equal measure. 3 years ago, he had retired from active duty and returned to Portland, the city where he had grown up, hoping to find something resembling peace. Peace, Marcus had discovered, was harder to find than he had expected. The woman in front of him in line caught his attention, not because of anything remarkable about her appearance, but because of the way she moved. There was a hesitancy in her gestures, a careful deliberation that spoke of someone accustomed to making every penny count. She was probably in her mid-30s, with tired eyes and light brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her clothes were clean but visibly worn, and she was carefully counting out cash from a small envelope as the cashier scanned her items. Marcus noticed the items on the conveyor belt: generic brand cereal, a gallon of store-brand milk, peanut butter, bread, and a small package of chicken thighs. Basic sustenance, nothing frivolous. The cashier, a young woman with bright purple streaks in her hair and a name tag that read Destiny, announced the total. "That'll be $23.47. The woman with the ponytail carefully counted out her bills and change, her lips moving silently as she calculated. Marcus could see the worry in the slight furrow of her brow, the way her shoulders tensed as she realized something. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her voice carrying that particular tone of embarrassment that comes with public financial difficulty. "I think I might be a little short. Could you maybe take off the chicken?" Destiny nodded sympathetically and began the process of voiding the item, but before she could complete the action, a voice cut through the air like a knife. "Oh, for God's sake, some of us have places to be." Marcus turned his head slightly to see the source of the voice. The man who had spoken was standing directly behind him in line, and everything about him screamed money. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, a gold watch that caught the fluorescent light with every gesture, and shoes so polished they seemed to glow. His hair was perfectly styled, silver at the temples in that distinguished way that expensive grooming made possible, and his face wore an expression of undisguised contempt. The wealthy man was perhaps in his late 50s, with the kind of tan that came from golf courses and yacht decks rather than honest labor. He held a single bottle of expensive wine, the kind that cost more than the woman's entire grocery order. "Did you hear me?" the man continued, his voice rising. "Some of us have important dinners to get to. We shouldn't have to wait while people who can't afford to shop hold up the line." The woman with the ponytail turned slightly, her face flushing red with humiliation. "I'm sorry. I'm going as fast as I can." "Well, go faster. Or better yet, Leave the groceries and get out of the way. This is ridiculous." Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he remained still, watching. Years of training had taught him to assess situations before acting, to understand the full picture before making a move. He had learned the hard way that rushing into confrontation rarely led to good outcomes. Destiny, the cashier, spoke up with admirable composure. "Sir, she'll just be a minute. I'm almost done here." "A minute?" The wealthy man let out a derisive laugh. "I've already been waiting 5 minutes. Do you know who I am? I'm Richard Ashworth. I own 3 buildings on this block. I could have this entire store shut down with a single phone call." The name Richard Ashworth did ring a bell in Marcus's memory. He had seen it in the local news, attached to various real estate developments and business ventures. Portland's Development King, they called him. A man who had made his fortune buying up old neighborhoods and replacing them with luxury condominiums that displaced long-time residents. The woman with the ponytail had finished putting her reduced groceries into a worn canvas bag. She moved to step aside, but in her hurry she accidentally bumped against Ashworth's arm, causing him to jostle his bottle of wine. What happened next would replay in Marcus's mind for days to come. Richard Ashworth's face contorted with rage, and without warning, he placed both hands on the woman's shoulders and shoved her forcefully. The woman, caught completely off guard, stumbled backward and fell hard against a display of canned goods. Cans scattered across the floor with a tremendous clatter, and she landed among them, her grocery bag spilling its contents across the dirty linoleum. For a moment, the entire store seemed to freeze. Customers stopped mid-stride, conversations halted, and even the muzak playing over the speakers seemed to pause. "Stay out of my way, you worthless piece of trash," Ashworth snarled, straightening his suit jacket as if he had done nothing more offensive than brush away a speck of dust. Marcus Thompson moved. He didn't rush, didn't charge, didn't make any sudden aggressive motions. He simply stepped out of his place in line and positioned himself between Ashworth and the fallen woman. His movements were calm, deliberate, and utterly controlled, but there was something in the set of his shoulders, the steadiness of his gaze, that made Ashworth take an involuntary step backward. "That's enough," Marcus said quietly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made people throughout the store turn to look. Ashworth recovered quickly, his arrogance reasserting itself. "Excuse me, who do you think you're talking to? This is none of your business." "You just assaulted a woman," Marcus replied, his tone still calm, almost conversational. "That makes it everyone's business." "Assaulted?" Ashworth laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it now. "I barely touched her. She ran into me. If anything, she assaulted me. Do you have any idea what this wine costs? If it had broken, I don't care what your wine costs." Marcus didn't raise his voice, but something in his eyes made Ashworth's words die in his throat. "I saw what happened. You put your hands on her. You pushed her to the ground. That's assault." Behind Marcus, the woman was being helped to her feet by Destiny, who had rushed around from behind the counter. Other customers were beginning to gather, some pulling out their phones. Ashworth's eyes darted around, registering the attention, the phones, the witnesses. His demeanor shifted slightly, becoming more defensive. "Look, I don't know who you are, but you clearly don't understand the situation. This woman was holding up the line. She bumped into me, and I simply moved her out of my way. It was an accident." "No," said a new voice. An elderly man with a veteran's cap pushed his cart forward. "I saw it too. You shoved her on purpose." "So did I," added a young mother holding a toddler on her hip. "I was right over there. You pushed her hard." Ashworth's face was beginning to redden, but whether from anger or embarrassment it was hard to tell. "This is absurd. I'm a respected member of this community. I'm not going to stand here and be lectured by who?" Marcus asked softly. By people who actually saw what you did? By people who don't think your money gives you the right to hurt others? The store manager, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a receding hairline and a worried expression, hurried over from the back of the store. "What's going on here? What happened?" Several voices spoke at once, competing to explain. The manager held up his hands, his face growing increasingly pale as he understood the situation. "Mr. Ashworth," he said carefully, clearly aware of the wealthy man's reputation and influence, "perhaps we could discuss this in my office." "There's nothing to discuss," Ashworth snapped. "I'm leaving. And trust me, you'll be hearing from my lawyers about this, all of you." He turned to go, but Marcus's voice stopped him. "You're not going anywhere until the police get here." Ashworth spun around, his face now genuinely red with fury. "Are you threatening me? Do you know what I can do to you? I will ruin your life. I will make sure you never work in this city again. I will—" "You can try," Marcus said simply. "But right now, you're going to wait for the police, or I'm going to make sure you do." There was nothing explicitly threatening in Marcus's posture. He stood with his hands at his sides, his body relaxed. But there was something in his stillness, something in the coiled readiness that anyone with eyes could see, that made Ashworth hesitate. "You don't want to do this," Ashworth said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I spent 18 years dealing with people a lot scarier than you," Marcus replied, "so trust me when I tell you I'm not impressed." The standoff lasted another few seconds before Ashworth's nerve broke. He pulled out his phone and began jabbing at the screen. "Fine, fine, call the police. I'll have my lawyers here in 20 minutes, and this whole thing will disappear. And then, my friend, then we'll see who has the last laugh." Marcus didn't respond. Instead, he turned his attention to the woman who had been pushed. She was standing now, supported by Destiny and another customer, her face a mix of shock, embarrassment, and something else, something that looked almost like hope. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked her gently, his entire demeanor shifting from the controlled intensity he had shown Ashworth. I think so," she said. Her voice was shaky. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause all this trouble. I should have just—" "You didn't cause anything," Marcus interrupted softly. "You were shopping for groceries. That's all. What he did isn't your fault." Tears began to well in her eyes. "Thank you. Thank you for, no one ever—" Marcus nodded, understanding what she couldn't say. In his years of service, he had seen how the powerful often treated the powerless, how quickly dignity could be stripped away by those who believed their status placed them above common decency. He had seen it in war zones, in occupied territories, and now here in a grocery store in his hometown. Some things never changed, but that didn't mean he had to accept them. The police arrived 12 minutes later. 2 officers, a man and a woman, entered the store with practiced professionalism. Marcus noted their body language, the way they scanned the scene, the slight tension in their postures. They had probably dealt with situations involving wealthy and influential individuals before, and they knew how complicated such encounters could become. "All right," the male officer said, his name tag reading Officer Chen. "Can someone tell me what happened here?" Ashworth immediately stepped forward, his confident demeanor restored now that authority had arrived. "Officer, thank God you're here. I'm Richard Ashworth, and I've been falsely accused of assault by these people. It was clearly an accident, but this man here," he pointed at Marcus, "has been threatening me and preventing me from leaving." Officer Chen's eyebrows rose slightly at the name Ashworth, but his expression remained neutral. "I see. And you are?" he asked Marcus. "Marcus Thompson. I witnessed Mr. Ashworth push this woman to the ground." He gestured to the woman, who was now sitting in a chair that someone had brought from the back of the store. "It was deliberate." "That's a lie," Ashworth sputtered. "I have video," said a voice from the crowd. A teenage boy, probably 16 or 17, stepped forward, holding up his phone. "I was recording a video for my friend when it happened. I got the whole thing." The look on Richard Ashworth's face in that moment was something Marcus would remember for a long time. It was the look of a man who had built his entire life on the assumption that his wealth and status would always protect him, suddenly realizing that protection had limits. "Let me see that," Ashworth demanded, reaching for the phone. "Sir, please step back," the female officer, whose name tag read Officer Martinez, said firmly. She held out her hand to the teenager. "May I see the video?" The teenager nodded and handed over his phone. Both officers watched the recording, their expressions growing more serious with each passing second. When it ended, they exchanged a look that spoke volumes. "Mr. Ashworth," Officer Chen said slowly, "I'm going to need you to come with us to the station to answer some questions. This is outrageous." Ashworth's voice rose to nearly a shout. "I'm calling my lawyer right now. You can't do this." "Do you know how much money I donate to the Police Benevolent Fund? Do you know who sits on the City Council? I'll have your badges." "Sir, you can call your lawyer from the station," Officer Martinez said calmly. "But right now, you're being detained on suspicion of assault. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, I can afford an army of attorneys." Ashworth snapped, but his face had gone pale. As the officers escorted the still protesting Ashworth out of the store, Marcus felt a hand on his arm. He turned to see the woman he had defended standing beside him. Up close, he could see the bruise already forming on her arm where she had fallen, the redness in her eyes from held-back tears. "I'm Elena," she said. "Elena Rodriguez. I wanted to thank you properly. What you did. No one's ever stood up for me like that before." Marcus shook his head. "You don't have to thank me. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Elena said quietly, and there was a lifetime of experience in that single word. "They wouldn't have. Trust me. I know." Something in her voice made Marcus look at her more closely. There were shadows in her eyes, the kind that came from more than just tonight's incident. He recognized those shadows. He saw them every morning in his own mirror. "Are you going to be okay getting home?" he asked. "Is there someone I can call for you?" Elena shook her head. "I'll be fine. I just live a few blocks from here." She paused, then added, "I have a daughter. She's 8. I need to get home to her." "Let me at least give you a ride," Marcus offered. "It's getting dark and you've had a rough night." Elena hesitated, and Marcus understood. She was a woman alone, being offered a ride by a stranger, even a stranger who had just helped her. "I have a car parked right out front," he added. "An old pickup truck. You can sit in the back seat if you're more comfortable, or I can just walk you home if you prefer. I just want to make sure you get there safely." Something in his voice, or perhaps in his eyes, seemed to reassure her. "Okay," she said finally. "Thank you, that would be very kind." As they walked toward the exit, the store manager hurried over. "Ma'am, wait. Your groceries, the ones that were damaged when you fell. Please, let me replace them. No charge." Elena looked surprised. "You don't have to." "I insist," the manager said. He looked genuinely distressed. "What happened here tonight? It shouldn't have happened. Not in my store. Please." Marcus noticed how the manager pointedly didn't apologize for Ashworth's behavior or minimize what had happened. It was a small thing, but it mattered. A few minutes later, Eleanor was holding a fresh bag of groceries, including the chicken she had originally put back, along with a few extra items the manager had quietly added. As they walked out into the cool October evening, Marcus heard her exhale slowly, as if releasing tension she had been holding for hours. His truck was parked under a streetlight, an old Ford F-150 that had seen better days but ran reliably. Marcus opened the passenger door for Elena, then walked around to the driver's side. The engine turned over with a familiar rumble, and they pulled out of the parking lot. "Thank you," Elena said again as they drove, "for everything. I still can't believe." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said, keeping his eyes on the road. "Of course." "That man, Ashworth, had you ever seen him before tonight?" Eleanor shook her head. "No, never. I don't exactly run in those circles." She let out a small, bitter laugh. "I work 2 jobs just to keep a roof over our heads. My daughter and I live in a small apartment over on Morrison Street. It's not much, but it's ours." She paused. "At least for now." "What do you mean, for now?" Elena was quiet for a moment. "The building we live in. It was just bought by a development company. They're planning to tear it down and build something new. Luxury condos, I think. We got a notice last month. We have 60 days to find somewhere else to live." Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. "Do you know which company?" "Some big real estate firm. I don't remember the exact name, but—" She stopped, her eyes widening. "Wait. Ashworth, Richard Ashworth. Isn't he in real estate?" "He is." Elena's face went pale. "Oh, God. Oh, no. What if he's the one who— What if his company is the one that bought our building? What if this makes everything worse?" "Don't think about that right now," Marcus said, though he was already thinking about it himself. "Tonight, you focus on getting home to your daughter. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." They drove the remaining few blocks in silence, Elena giving quiet directions until they arrived at a modest brick building that had probably been standing since the 1940s. The lights in the windows were warm against the evening darkness, and Marcus could see a small face pressed against one of the second-floor windows, watching for someone. "That's Sophia," Elena said, a soft smile breaking through her worry. "She's probably been watching for me since it got dark." She gathered her groceries and opened the truck door, then turned back to Marcus. "I don't know how to thank you enough for what you did tonight. If there's ever anything I can do—" "Just take care of yourself and your daughter," Marcus said. "That's all the thanks I need." Elena nodded, but before she closed the door she asked, "The things you said to him about dealing with scarier people for 18 years, were you military?" "Navy," Marcus replied. "A long time ago." Elena studied his face for a moment, and something in her expression shifted to understanding. "My father was Army," she said quietly. "He did 2 tours in Vietnam. He never talked about what happened over there, but I could see it in his eyes sometimes, the same thing I see in yours." She paused. "Thank you for your service, and thank you for tonight." She closed the door and walked toward her building, pausing at the entrance to wave before disappearing inside. Marcus sat in his truck for a few minutes, watching the light come on in the second-floor apartment, seeing the silhouette of mother and daughter embracing. Then he put the truck in gear and drove home. Marcus Thompson's apartment was located in a converted warehouse in the industrial district, one of the few areas of Portland that hadn't yet been gentrified into unrecognizability. It was a sparse space, functional rather than comfortable, with exposed brick walls, high ceilings, and windows that looked out over the train yards. He had chosen it deliberately. After years of living in tight quarters with other SEALs, of sleeping in tents and bunkers and the backs of vehicles, he needed space. Space to breathe. Space to think. Space to try to figure out who he was when he wasn't a warrior. The answer to that question remained elusive. Marcus dropped his keys on the small table by the door and walked to the refrigerator, pulling out a bottle of water. He didn't keep alcohol in the apartment anymore. Too many of his brothers in arms had found their way to the bottom of a bottle after leaving the service, and he had no intention of joining them. He sat down on his second-hand couch and stared at the exposed ductwork overhead, replaying the events of the evening in his mind. The confrontation with Ashworth had been relatively minor by the standards of his former life. No weapons, no tactical considerations, no lives in the balance. And yet, there had been a moment, just a brief moment, when Ashworth had been reaching for that teenager's phone, when Marcus had felt the old instinct stirring. The assessment of angles and distances, the calculation of force required to neutralize a threat, the cold clarity that came from years of training and combat. He had suppressed it, of course. The situation hadn't called for that level of response. But the fact that it had surfaced at all troubled him. His phone buzzed, breaking his reverie. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but he answered anyway. "Mr. Thompson, this is Detective Sarah Okonkwo with the Portland Police Department. I understand you were a witness to an incident at Peterson's grocery this evening." "That's right," Marcus said, sitting up straighter. "I'd like to ask you some questions about what happened, if you have a few minutes. And if possible, I'd appreciate it if you could come down to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement." "Of course. What do you need to know?" The conversation lasted about 20 minutes. Marcus gave a detailed account of what he had witnessed, careful to be precise and factual. Detective Okonkwo asked thorough questions, and Marcus found himself impressed by her professionalism. "One more thing," the detective said before ending the call. "The victim, Elena Rodriguez. She mentioned that you gave her a ride home. Do you have contact information for her?" "I know where she lives, but I didn't get her phone number," Marcus replied. "She has a daughter, so she needed to get home." "I understand. We'll follow up with her through other channels." There was a pause. "Mr. Thompson, I should tell you that Mr. Ashworth's attorneys are already making noise. They're claiming this was a misunderstanding, that you provoked the situation, that the video has been taken out of context. They're very aggressive. I'm not surprised. Just be prepared. Men like Ashworth don't like being challenged, and they have resources to make life difficult for people who cross them." Marcus almost smiled. "Detective, I've had people try to kill me in 7 different countries. I think I can handle a real estate developer." There was a brief silence on the other end, then a quiet laugh. "Fair enough. I'll be in touch about that statement. Have a good night, Mr. Thompson." After the call ended, Marcus sat in the darkness of his apartment for a long time, thinking about Eleanor and her daughter facing eviction from their home, about Ashworth and the casual cruelty of the entitled, about the systems that protected the powerful and ground down the weak, and about what, if anything, he could do about any of it. Sleep came eventually, but it was restless, filled with fragmented dreams of distant battlefields and faces he hadn't thought about in years. The next morning dawned grey and cool, typical October weather for Portland. Marcus was up before sunrise, a habit he had never been able to break. He went for a 5-mile run through the empty streets, pushing himself until his lungs burned and his legs ached, trying to outrun the thoughts that had plagued him through the night. By 8 o'clock, he was showered, dressed, and heading to the police station to give his statement. The building was a nondescript concrete structure downtown, and the interior had the familiar institutional feel of government buildings everywhere. Fluorescent lights, worn linoleum, the faint smell of coffee and bureaucracy. Detective Okonkwo turned out to be a tall woman in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She led Marcus to a small interview room and took his statement with methodical precision, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "You mentioned that you're former military," she said at one point, glancing at her notes. "Can you be more specific?" "Navy SEAL," Marcus replied. 18 years, retired 3 years ago. Okonkwo's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's impressive. What brought you back to Portland?" "It's where I grew up. After I retired, I needed somewhere to figure out what came next. This seemed as good a place as any." "And have you figured out what comes next?" Marcus considered the question. "Still working on it. The detective nodded, as if this answer made perfect sense to her. "One more thing, Mr. Thompson. When you confronted Ashworth at the store, you told him you could make sure he stayed until the police arrived. Did you mean that as a threat?" "I meant it as a statement of fact," Marcus said carefully. "I wasn't going to let him leave without being held accountable for what he did. If he had tried to push past me, I would have physically prevented him from leaving. But I didn't threaten him with violence. The distinction matters," Okonkwo said. "Ashworth's lawyers are trying to spin this as you being the aggressor. They're painting him as a victim who was intimidated by a dangerous stranger. He pushed a woman to the ground because she inconvenienced him for 30 seconds, Marcus replied evenly. "I stood between them and told him to wait for the police. If that makes me the aggressor, then the word has lost its meaning." Okonkwo almost smiled. "For what it's worth, I agree with you. But this case is getting attention. The video from last night has already gone viral. Ashworth is a prominent figure in this city, and there are people who want this to go away quietly." "And what do you want?" The detective met his eyes directly. "I want to do my job, which means following the evidence and the law, regardless of how much money the suspect has." She paused. "But I won't pretend it's going to be easy. Men like Ashworth have ways of making problems disappear." Marcus left the police station with a strange feeling, a mixture of determination and apprehension. He had spent his military career operating in a world with clear rules of engagement, where the mission was defined and the enemy was identifiable. This was different. This was a battlefield of lawyers and money and influence, where the weapons were invisible and the rules were written by those with power. As he walked to his truck, his phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. He opened it to find a brief message. "This is Elena. I got your number from the store manager. I hope that's okay. The police contacted me this morning. They said the case is moving forward. I don't know what's going to happen, but I wanted you to know how much last night meant to me. You gave me something I haven't felt in a long time. Hope." Marcus stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back a simple reply. "Whatever happens, you're not alone in this. Stay strong." He was about to pocket his phone when another message came through, this one from a different, unknown number. It contained no words, just an image, a photograph of Elena's apartment building taken from the street. Below the image was a single sentence: "Stay out of things that don't concern you." Marcus felt a cold fury settle into his bones, the kind of controlled anger that had served him well in combat. Someone was watching Elena. Someone was trying to intimidate him. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The next few days passed in a strange rhythm of tension and waiting. Marcus made some calls to people he knew, former colleagues who had transitioned into private security, investigation, and other fields where military skills translated. He learned that Richard Ashworth's company, Ashworth Development Group, had indeed purchased Elena's building, along with several others in the same neighborhood. The planned development was called Morrison Heights, and it would bring nearly 500 luxury condominiums to an area that currently housed over 1,000 lower-income residents. The displacement of those residents, Marcus discovered, was not an unfortunate side effect of the development. It was the entire point. "It's called economic cleansing," explained his friend Derek Williams, a former Marine who now worked as the investigative journalist. They were meeting at a coffee shop in the Pearl District, and Derek spoke quietly despite the noise of the espresso machines. "You buy up property in lower-income neighborhoods, evict the current residents, tear down the existing buildings, and replace them with luxury housing. The property values in the surrounding area skyrocket, forcing out anyone who can't afford the new prices. Within a few years, you've transformed an entire community." "And that's legal?" "Mostly. There are some protections for tenants, but they're weak and poorly enforced. Developers like Ashworth have armies of lawyers who know every loophole. Derek shook his head. The irony is that Portland was supposed to be different. All those progressive policies, all that talk about affordable housing and community preservation, but money talks louder than ideals. Marcus thought about Elena and Sophia, about the small apartment that represented everything they had. Is there anything that can be done? That depends on what you mean by done. Derek's eyes were careful. If you're asking whether the development can be stopped through legal channels, probably not. Ashworth has permits, contracts, the whole 9 yards. But if you're asking whether there's a story here, something that could put public pressure on him, then maybe. What kind of story? Derek leaned forward. I've been looking into Ashworth for a while now. He's got connections everywhere, city council, the mayor's office, the planning commission, but there are rumors of impropriety, bribes, falsified environmental reports, violations of tenant protection laws. Nothing I can prove yet, but where there's smoke, there's fire, Marcus finished. Exactly. The problem is access. Ashworth keeps his real operations locked down tight. His public-facing business is clean as a whistle, but somewhere there's documentation of the dirty stuff. There always is. I just need to find it. Marcus considered this, and if someone were to help you find it? Derek smiled, but there was a warning in it, that someone would need to be very careful. Ashworth plays for keeps. The threatening message you got is just the beginning. If he thinks you're a real threat, he'll escalate. I've dealt with escalation before. Not like this. In war, you know who your enemies are. Here, they wear suits and smile while they destroy your life. Marcus finished his coffee and stood. Then I'll have to make sure they know who they're dealing with too. Over the following week, Marcus did something he hadn't done since leaving the military. He conducted reconnaissance. Not the kind that involved night vision goggles and satellite imagery, but the civilian equivalent. He gathered information. He observed patterns. He learned the landscape of his new battlefield. Ashworth Development Group operated out of a sleek glass tower in downtown Portland, all clean lines and corporate efficiency. Marcus spent hours watching the building, noting who came and went, identifying the key players. He researched public records, property transactions, court filings, and news archives. He talked to people who had done business with Ashworth and to people who had been hurt by him. What he found confirmed Derek's suspicions. Richard Ashworth had built his empire not just on shrewd business sense, but on a willingness to bend or break rules when it suited him. Former employees, speaking off the record, described a culture of intimidation and retaliation. Tenants who had resisted eviction told stories of harassment, suspicious fires, and threats delivered by men who were never identified. But the most damning information came from an unexpected source. Marcus had been visiting Elena regularly since the grocery store incident, checking in on her and Sophia, making sure they were safe. During one of these visits, Elena mentioned something in passing that made Marcus's ears prick up. "The strangest thing happened today," she said, pouring coffee in her small kitchen while Sophia did homework at the table. "A woman came by the building asking questions. She said she was from some kind of tenant advocacy group, but she seemed, I don't know, nervous, like she was scared of something." "What kind of questions did she ask?" "About the building sale, about the eviction notices, whether anyone had been threatened or pressured, whether we'd been offered buyouts to leave early." Elena paused. "I told her about the message you got, the one with the picture. She got very quiet when I mentioned that." "Did she leave any contact information?" "A card." Elena retrieved it from a drawer and handed it to Marcus. It read, "Portland Tenants' Rights Coalition," with a phone number and an email address, but no individual name. Marcus pocketed the card. "I'll look into it. In the meantime, keep your doors locked and don't let anyone in you don't know." "You're scaring me," Elena said quietly. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to scare you. I just want you to be careful." Sophia looked up from her homework, her dark eyes serious. "Are we in danger, Mr. Marcus?" Marcus crouched down to her level. "I'm going to make sure nothing bad happens to you or your mum, okay? That's a promise." The little girl studied his face with an intensity beyond her years, then nodded solemnly. "Okay, I believe you." As Marcus left the apartment that evening, he felt the weight of that promise settling onto his shoulders. He had made similar promises before, to fellow SEALs, to informants, to innocent people caught in the crossfire of conflicts they didn't understand. He had kept most of those promises, but not all of them. Not all of them. The woman from the tenant advocacy group was named Dr. Patricia Chen, and she turned out to be a law professor at Portland State University who had been investigating Ashworth's business practices for over a year. When Marcus finally tracked her down and convinced her to meet with him, she was initially suspicious. "How do I know you're not working for Ashworth?" she asked. They were meeting at a park far from campus, both of them on edge. "Because Ashworth tried to intimidate me after I stopped him from assaulting a woman in a grocery store," Marcus replied. "And because I'm trying to protect that woman and her daughter from being thrown out of their home." Patricia studied him for a long moment, then seemed to make a decision. "Elena Rodriguez, I talked to her. She spoke very highly of you. She shouldn't be involved in this. She's just trying to raise her daughter. She's already involved." The moment she became a tenant in a building Ashworth wanted, she became a target. Patricia pulled out a tablet and began swiping through documents. "Let me show you what I've found." What she showed him was damning. Emails obtained through FOIA requests showing communication between Ashworth's company and city officials that skirted the line of bribery. Inspection reports that had been mysteriously revised after initial findings of building code violations. Testimony from former employees describing being ordered to falsify environmental impact statements. "The problem," Patricia said, "is that none of this is quite enough for a criminal case. It's suggestive, not conclusive. Ashworth's lawyers are very good at creating plausible deniability. What would be enough? Direct evidence of corruption, recordings, documents, something that proves a clear quid pro quo." She hesitated. "There's a rumor that Ashworth keeps detailed records of all his informal arrangements, a kind of insurance policy in case anyone tries to turn on him. If those records exist, and someone could get access to them." "You want me to steal documents from Richard Ashworth?" "I want someone to obtain evidence of criminal activity," Patricia said carefully. "How that evidence is obtained is not my area of expertise." Marcus shook his head slowly. "I'm not going to break the law. I spent 18 years defending this country and its principles. I'm not going to become a criminal, even for a good cause." Patricia looked disappointed, but not surprised. "I understand. I just thought with your background. My background taught me that the ends don't justify the means. The moment you convince yourself that they do, you become the thing you're fighting against." They sat in silence for a moment, watching joggers pass by on the park's winding paths. "There might be another way," Patricia said finally. "The Morrison Heights development requires city council approval for a zoning variance. That approval is scheduled to come up for a vote in 3 weeks. If there was enough public pressure, enough negative publicity, the council might be persuaded to delay or deny the variance. And if they deny it, the project falls apart. Ashworth loses tens of millions of dollars. The buildings don't get demolished. The tenants get to stay." Marcus considered this. "Public pressure? You mean protests, media coverage?" "All of that. But it would need to be sustained and organized. Ashworth will fight back with everything he has. It would take someone who knows how to coordinate a campaign, how to handle pressure, how to lead people in a difficult fight." She looked at Marcus meaningfully. "I'm not a community organizer," he said. No, Patricia agreed, but you're a leader. I saw how you handled Ashworth in that grocery store, the video, like everyone else. You have a way of inspiring people, of making them believe that standing up for what's right is possible. That was one moment. This would be weeks of sustained effort. And Elena Rodriguez and her daughter are running out of time, so are hundreds of other families in those buildings. Patricia gathered her tablet and stood. Think about it, Mr. Thompson. You told me you spent 18 years defending this country's principles. Well, one of those principles is that ordinary people shouldn't be pushed around by the rich and powerful, that everyone deserves a fair chance, that communities matter. She handed him a flash drive. This has everything I've gathered so far. Contact information for tenant groups, journalists who have expressed interest, legal resources. If you decide to do something with it, you'll have support. If not, she shrugged, I'll keep fighting anyway. It's just harder alone. Marcus took the drive and watched her walk away. He sat on the bench for a long time after she left, the small plastic device heavy in his hand. Then he went home and started making a plan. The first step was building a coalition. Marcus reached out to everyone he could think of who might help. Veterans groups, community organizations, churches, small business owners, and ordinary citizens who were tired of watching their neighborhoods be transformed into playgrounds for the wealthy. The response surprised him. People were angry, and they had been waiting for someone to channel that anger into action. Within a week, Marcus had a core team of volunteers, including Elena, who had insisted on being involved despite his concerns. This is my home, she told him firmly. Mine and Sophia's. I'm not going to sit on the sidelines while other people fight for it. He couldn't argue with that. The second step was media attention. Derek Williams proved invaluable here, using his journalist contacts to place stories about the Morrison Heights development and its impact on long-term residents. The video of Ashworth's assault on Elena was repackaged with new context, showing not just a single incident of bullying, but a pattern of behavior toward those he considered beneath him. The story gained traction. Local news covered it first, then regional outlets, then national media began to take notice. The narrative was irresistible. A wealthy developer who literally pushed around the people he was displacing, confronted by a Navy SEAL veteran who stood up for the vulnerable. Ashworth's PR team went into overdrive, releasing statements about the unfortunate misunderstanding at the grocery store, about the company's commitment to responsible development and community engagement. They announced a new fund to provide relocation assistance to displaced tenants, a transparent attempt to buy good publicity. But the damage was done. Public opinion had turned against Ashworth, and every new revelation only made it worse. The third step was political pressure. Patricia Chen organized meetings between tenant groups and sympathetic city council members, providing documentation of Ashworth Development's questionable practices. Two councillors who had previously supported the Morrison Heights project quietly changed their positions. A third announced that she would be requesting an independent review of the environmental impact statements. Ashworth fought back. Anonymous complaints appeared against businesses that supported the tenant coalition. Intimidating strangers were spotted near the homes of vocal opponents. Someone slashed the tires on Marcus's truck. And then, 2 weeks before the city council vote, things escalated dramatically. Marcus was at a community meeting in a church basement, explaining the timeline for the upcoming council vote, when his phone buzzed with an emergency alert. He glanced at the screen and felt his blood run cold. It was a text from Eleanor. "Help! Someone's breaking into the apartment. Sophia is with me. Please come." Marcus was out the door before the message finished sinking in, sprinting to his truck with a speed that left the other meeting attendees staring in confusion. The drive to Elena's building normally took 12 minutes. Marcus made it in 7, running 2 red lights and breaking every speed limit along the way. His mind was racing through scenarios, calculating responses, falling back on years of training for exactly this kind of emergency. He pulled up in front of the building and immediately noticed the broken glass in the front door's window panel. Someone had smashed their way in. Marcus didn't hesitate. He pushed through the damaged door and took the stairs 2 at a time, reaching the 2nd floor in seconds. Elena's apartment was at the end of the hall, and he could see that the door was hanging open, the frame splintered where the lock had been forced. He slowed as he approached, years of tactical training overriding his urge to rush in blindly. He listened for sounds, scanned for threats, prepared for anything. What he found was Elena and Sophia huddled in the corner of their small living room, both crying but apparently unharmed. The apartment had been ransacked, furniture overturned, drawers emptied, possessions scattered across the floor. "Are you hurt?" Marcus asked immediately, scanning them for injuries. Elena shook her head, clutching Sophia tightly. No, we're okay. We hid in the bathroom when we heard them break in. They were looking for something. I could hear them going through everything, cursing, saying they couldn't find it." "Find what?" "I don't know. I don't have anything valuable. There's nothing here worth stealing." Marcus pulled out his phone to call 911, but before he could dial, he noticed something that made him pause. On the wall above the scattered remnants of Elena's small dining table, someone had spray-painted a message in red letters. "Stop, or next time we won't leave them alone." The message was clear. This hadn't been a burglary. It had been a warning. Marcus felt a rage building inside him that he hadn't experienced in years, a cold, controlled fury that had served him well in combat, but that he had hoped to never feel again. Someone had broken into this home, terrorized a mother and her child, violated their sense of safety and security, all to send a message. And he knew exactly who was responsible. The police arrived within minutes, summoned by neighbors who had heard the commotion. Officers took statements, photographed the damage, and made sympathetic noises about pursuing the perpetrators. But Marcus could tell from their body language that they didn't expect to find anyone. Break-ins like this, with no witnesses and no evidence, rarely resulted in arrests. Detective Okonkwo arrived shortly after, surveying the scene with a grim expression. She pulled Marcus aside while other officers took Elena's statement. "This is connected to the Ashworth case," she said quietly. "It wasn't a question. It has to be. The message on the wall, the timing, everything points to it." Okonkwo nodded slowly. "I believe you, but believing and proving are 2 different things. Ashworth is too smart to order something like this directly. There will be layers of deniability, cutouts, people who can't be traced back to him. So he just gets away with it?" "I didn't say that." Okonkwo's eyes were hard. "I said it would be difficult, but not impossible. If we can find a connection, any connection, between the people who did this and Ashworth's organization, then what? Then we have leverage. Then we can start peeling back the layers." She paused. "In the meantime, Ms. Rodriguez and her daughter need somewhere safe to stay, somewhere that isn't here." Marcus had already been thinking the same thing. "I have a place, an apartment in the industrial district. It's secure, and no one knows about it except me." "Your place? It's bigger than this. I'll sleep on the couch. They can have the bedroom." Okonkwo studied him for a moment. "You know this could get worse before it gets better. If Ashworth realizes you're not backing down, he'll escalate again." "I know. And you're still willing to put yourself in the middle of it." Marcus looked at Elena across the room, at Sophia curled against her mother's side, both of them looking small and frightened in their violated home. Someone has to. An hour later, Marcus was helping Elena and Sophia load their essential belongings into his truck. Most of their possessions had been damaged or destroyed in the break-in, but Elena had managed to salvage some clothes, a few photographs, and Sophia's favorite stuffed animal, a worn purple elephant named Mr. Trumpets. The drive to Marcus's apartment was quiet. Sophia had fallen asleep against her mother's shoulder, exhausted by the night's trauma. Elena stared out the window at the passing streets, her face a mask of controlled emotion. "I'm sorry," she said finally, so quietly Marcus almost didn't hear her. "For what? For getting you involved in all this? You were just shopping for groceries, and now—" She gestured helplessly. "Now you're in the middle of a war." "I was in a war for 18 years, Marcus replied. "At least this one is for something that matters." Elena turned to look at him. "Why are you doing this? Really? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why are you risking so much for strangers?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching the streetlights flash by. "When I was overseas," he said finally, "I saw things. Good things and terrible things. I saw communities destroyed by conflict, families torn apart, people who had nothing but still found ways to help each other. And I saw people with power use that power to crush anyone who got in their way." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I always told myself that when I came home, things would be different. That this country was built on better principles, that people here wouldn't be treated the way I saw people treated in war zones. But that was naive. The truth is, the same dynamics exist everywhere. Power corrupts, the strong prey on the weak, and most people are too scared or too tired to fight back. But not you. I can't not fight back. It's not in my nature. When I see someone hurting someone else, when I see injustice happening right in front of me, I have to act. It's what I was trained for. It's who I am." Elena was silent for a moment. Then she said, "You know, when I first saw you in the grocery store, I thought you were just another person who would look away. That's what most people do. They see something wrong, and they look away because getting involved is messy and dangerous and might cost them something. And now? Now I think I was wrong about a lot of things. I was wrong about people like you existing. I was wrong about hoping for better being foolish." She looked at her sleeping daughter. "Sophia asked me today if good guys ever win. I didn't know what to tell her, but watching you, seeing what you're doing, maybe now I have an answer." They arrived at Marcus's apartment, and he helped them get settled. The space was sparse, but it was clean and safe, with good locks on the doors, and no one who knew to look for them there. "Get some sleep," Marcus told Elena. "Tomorrow, we figure out what comes next." "What about you? I have some calls to make." Elena hesitated at the bedroom door. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything. I know I keep saying that, but I don't know how else to express what it means to me. You don't have to express it. Just get through this. That's all I ask." After Elena and Sophia were settled, Marcus sat down at his small desk and began making calls. Derek Williams was first, filling him in on the break-in and the message. "This is big," Derek said, his journalist instincts clearly engaged. "Ashworth is getting desperate. He wouldn't have risked something this visible unless he felt threatened." "Can you use it?" "Absolutely, but we need more than your testimony. We need documentation, photos of the damage, copies of the police report, and if we can find any witnesses—" The neighbors heard the commotion, but no one saw who did it. "Doesn't matter. The fact that it happened, the timing, the message on the wall, it all tells a story. I can work with that." Marcus's next call was to Patricia Chen. She listened to his account with growing anger. "This is exactly what he does," she said. "This is how he operates. He terrorizes people until they're too scared to fight back, and then he does whatever he wants." "Not this time. Be careful, Marcus. You've become a symbol for this movement. If something happens to you, it could demoralize everyone who started to believe we can win. Nothing's going to happen to me, and even if it does, this isn't about me anymore. It's bigger than any one person." His final call was to a number he hadn't dialed in years, his former commanding officer, now retired and living in San Diego. Captain James Harrison answered on the third ring. "Thompson, it's been a while." "Yes, sir." "It has. I saw the news coverage. That video from the grocery store looked like you handled yourself well." "Thank you, sir. But something tells me this isn't a social call." Marcus explained the situation, the escalating conflict with Ashworth, the break-in, the threats. Harrison listened without interrupting. "What do you need?" he asked when Marcus finished. "I'm not sure exactly. Information, maybe. Advice. I'm trained to fight enemies I can see, targets I can engage. This is different." Harrison was quiet for a moment. Different battlefield, same principles. Identify the objective, assess the threats, develop a plan, execute with precision. The tools change, but the fundamentals don't. And if the enemy has more resources than you, then you use what you have more effectively. You leverage asymmetric advantages. You find their weaknesses and exploit them. Harrison paused. "You were one of the best operators I ever commanded, Marcus. Not because you were the strongest or the fastest, but because you could see angles that others missed. You could turn disadvantages into opportunities. That hasn't changed just because you're not wearing a uniform anymore." "I appreciate that, sir. One more thing. You mentioned this woman and her daughter, the ones you're protecting. How far are you willing to go for them?" It was a question Marcus had been asking himself. "All the way, sir. Whatever it takes." "Good. Because half measures won't cut it. Either you commit fully or you pull back entirely. There's no middle ground in a fight like this." "I understand. Then go win. And Marcus, when this is over, win or lose, you call me again. We'll have that beer we've been promising each other for years." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." Marcus ended the call and sat in the darkness of his apartment, listening to the distant sound of trains in the rail yard. Through the thin walls, he could hear Sophia's breathing, the soft sounds of a child sleeping peacefully despite the chaos that had invaded her life. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. But tonight, for a few hours at least, there was peace. The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity. Derek's story about the break-in and the threatening message ran on the front page of the local paper and was picked up by several national outlets. Public outrage, already simmering, boiled over. The mayor's office was flooded with calls demanding an investigation into Ashworth Development's practices. More importantly, 2 more victims came forward, former tenants of Ashworth-owned buildings who reported similar intimidation tactics, anonymous threats, suspicious incidents, pressure to leave before they were legally required to. Their stories corroborated the pattern that Patricia Chen had been documenting for years. The City Council, sensing the shift in public opinion, announced that they would hold public hearings before the scheduled vote on the Morrison Heights zoning variance. For 3 days, community members would have the opportunity to speak for or against the project. Those hearings became the focal point of the movement. Supporters of the tenant coalition organized transportation for people who needed help getting to City Hall. Pro bono lawyers helped residents prepare their testimony. Local businesses donated food and water for the crowds who gathered outside. Ashworth's camp didn't remain idle. His PR team launched a counter-offensive, purchasing advertising that touted the economic benefits of the development, the jobs it would create, the tax revenue it would generate. They organized their own supporters to attend the hearings and speak in favor of the project, emphasizing the modernization and growth it represented. But they had badly misjudged the public mood. Every positive testimonial from a developer or investment banker was drowned out by a dozen stories from ordinary residents facing displacement, from families who had lived in their homes for generations, from elderly people who didn't know where they would go if they were evicted. And then there was Eleanor. On the second day of the hearings, she took her turn at the public microphone. She was visibly nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the microphone stand. But her voice was clear and steady when she began to speak. My name is Elena Rodriguez. I'm a single mother. I work 2 jobs to provide for my daughter Sophia, who is 8 years old. For the past 5 years, we've lived in an apartment building on Morrison Street, a building that is now scheduled to be demolished by Ashworth Development. She paused, taking a breath. I'm not a public speaker. I'm not an activist. I'm just a woman trying to raise my daughter in the only home she's ever known. But I'm here today because someone has to say what's happening to people like me. Elena looked around the crowded council chamber, her eyes meeting those of the councillors, the journalists, the ordinary citizens who had come to bear witness. 2 weeks ago, men broke into our apartment. They ransacked our home, destroyed our belongings, and spray-painted a threat on our wall. They did this because I spoke out against the company that wants to take our home. A murmur ran through the chamber. Several councillors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I know I can't prove who sent those men, Eleanor continued. I know people will say it's just a coincidence, that there's no connection. But I know the truth, and I think everyone in this room knows the truth, even if we're afraid to say it out loud. She turned to look directly at Richard Ashworth, who was sitting in the front row with his lawyers. You think you can intimidate us into silence. You think your money and your power give you the right to push people around, literally push us, like we're obstacles in your way. Her voice grew stronger, steadier. But you're wrong. You pushed a woman in a grocery store because she inconvenienced you for 30 seconds. And a man I'd never met stood up and said no. He said that wasn't acceptable. He said people like me deserve to be treated with dignity. Elena's eyes found Marcus in the crowd. That man gave me something I had lost, the courage to believe that standing up for ourselves matters, that we're not powerless, that our voices count. She turned back to the council. You're about to vote on whether to give this man and his company the permission they need to destroy our neighborhood. I'm asking you, pleading with you to see us, not as obstacles to progress, but as human beings with lives and families and histories that matter. Her voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. My daughter asked me recently if good guys ever win. I didn't have an answer for her, but I'm hoping that the answer is yes. I'm hoping that today, in this room, the good guys will win. Elena stepped back from the microphone to thunderous applause. Even some of the councillors joined in, caught up in the emotional force of her words. Marcus watched from his seat in the back of the chamber, feeling something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Pride, he realized, not in himself, but in Elena, in the community that had come together, in the ordinary people who had found the courage to speak truth to power. Whatever happened next, this moment was a victory in itself. The final day of hearings brought more testimony, more stories, more evidence of the human cost of unchecked development. But the most significant moment came near the end of the session, when an unexpected witness took the stand. His name was Robert Marchetti, and he introduced himself as a former project manager for Ashworth Development. He was a nervous man in his 50s, with thinning hair and a suit that didn't quite fit right, and his voice shook as he spoke. I worked for Mr. Ashworth for 7 years, he said. I believed in what we were doing, the developments, the growth, all of it. I told myself we were building a better city. He paused, swallowing hard. But I knew things I never talked about because I was afraid of losing my job, my reputation, everything I'd built. His eyes darted to Ashworth, then away. But when I saw what happened to that woman and her daughter, the break-in, the threats, I couldn't stay silent anymore. Marchetti pulled out a folder of documents. I have here copies of internal communications showing that Ashworth Development routinely engaged in illegal practices to force out tenants. Falsified safety violations, bribery of building inspectors, coordination with private investigators to dig up personal information on anyone who resisted. The chamber erupted in chaos. Ashworth was on his feet, his lawyers surrounding him, shouting objections. The council chair banged her gavel repeatedly, calling for order. "These documents are forgeries," one of Ashworth's attorneys shouted. "This is slander. We'll sue everyone in this room." But Marchetti continued, his voice gaining strength. "I have records of payments made to city officials in exchange for favorable rulings. I have emails discussing plans to intimidate specific tenants, including Elena Rodriguez." He held up the documents. "I'm submitting these to the council for review, and I've already provided copies to the police and the district attorney's office." The rest of the session was pandemonium. Ashworth and his lawyers stormed out of the chamber, threatening legal action against everyone involved. Journalists scrambled to get statements. Community members embraced each other, hardly daring to believe what they had witnessed. Marcus found Patricia Chen in the chaos. "Did you know about this?" he asked. She shook her head, looking almost as stunned as everyone else. "Marchetti contacted me 2 days ago. He said he'd been carrying this guilt for years, and the news coverage pushed him over the edge. He couldn't live with himself anymore." "Will it be enough for the council vote?" "Probably. No one wants to be associated with this now." She paused. "For criminal charges against Ashworth, that depends on what the DA does with those documents. But at the very least, the Morrison Heights project is dead. No one's going to approve that zoning variance now." Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a tension he hadn't fully realized he'd been carrying. "It's over. This battle, yes. But men like Ashworth don't go away quietly. There will be lawsuits, appeals, attempts to salvage his reputation. The fight isn't over, it's just entering a new phase. But for today, Marcus thought, today was enough. Today, the good guys had won. 3 months later, Marcus stood on the sidewalk outside Elena's apartment building, watching a crew of workers install new windows. The building hadn't been demolished. It hadn't even been sold. After the scandal surrounding his testimony at the hearings, Robert Marchetti had become the key witness in a sweeping corruption investigation that had brought down not only Richard Ashworth, but a network of complicit officials and business partners. Ashworth Development Group was in bankruptcy proceedings. Its assets were being liquidated to pay fines and settlements. Richard Ashworth himself was facing multiple criminal charges, including bribery, witness intimidation, and conspiracy. He was out on bail, but his days of terrorizing communities were over. The Morrison Street buildings had been purchased by a non-profit housing organization, which had committed to maintaining them as affordable housing for at least the next 30 years. Elena and Sophia would be able to stay in their home. "You look lost in thought." Marcus turned to see Eleanor approaching with 2 cups of coffee. She was smiling, a real smile that reached her eyes, something he had rarely seen in the months he'd known her. "Just thinking about how things turned out," he said, accepting the coffee. "Wondering what comes next. For you or for all of us. Both, I guess." Elena leaned against the building's brick facade, looking out at the neighborhood that had changed so much and yet remained fundamentally the same. "I've been thinking about that too. About what I want to do now, that I'm not spending all my energy just surviving. Any conclusions?" "Maybe." She took a sip of her coffee. "Patricia Chen offered me a job at the tenant advocacy organization. Part-time at first, but it could grow into something more. She said I have a talent for connecting with people, for making them feel heard. She's right about that." Elena smiled again. "I'm scared. It's a big change. But I've learned something these past few months. Being scared doesn't mean you can't act. It just means what you're doing matters." "That's a pretty good lesson. I had a good teacher." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching a group of children playing on the sidewalk across the street. Among them was Sophia, her purple elephant tucked under one arm, laughing at something one of her friends had said. "What about you?" Eleanor asked. "Now that the crisis is over, what's next for Marcus Thompson?" It was a question Marcus had been wrestling with ever since the city council vote. For months, he had had a clear mission: protect Elena and Sophia, fight against Ashworth, help the community resist. But now that mission was complete, and he was left with the same emptiness that had haunted him since leaving the military. "I don't know," he admitted. "I spent 18 years knowing exactly what I was supposed to do and who I was supposed to be. Since then, I've been drifting, trying to find a new purpose. This fight gave me that, at least for a while. And now?" Marcus looked at Sophia across the street, at the neighborhood that was still standing, at the woman beside him who had become something like a friend. "I'm starting to think that maybe purpose isn't something you find once and hold on to forever. Maybe it's something you have to keep discovering over and over as life changes." That sounds very philosophical. 3 years of looking for answers will do that to you. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know, the organization Patricia works with, they're always looking for volunteers, security consultants, people who can help when situations get dangerous. It wouldn't be full-time, but it might be a place to start." "You're trying to recruit me?" "I'm trying to say thank you in a way that involves something other than words." She met his eyes. "You gave me my life back, Marcus. You gave Sophia her mother back. Whatever happens next for you, I want you to know that you made a difference, a real, lasting difference in real people's lives." Marcus felt something shift inside him, a piece of the broken wholeness that he had carried since leaving the service falling into place. "That means more than you know." "Good. Then stop wandering around looking lost and come have dinner with us tonight. Sophia's been asking about you." "Dinner sounds good." They walked together toward the building's entrance, but before they went inside, Marcus paused. "Elena, that night at the grocery store, do you ever think about how different things might have been if I hadn't been there?" Elena considered the question. "All the time. And then I think about how different things might have been if I hadn't dropped that can of beans in aisle 7, which made me go to the back of the store, which put me in that particular checkout line at that particular moment." She smiled. "Life is full of tiny accidents that turn out to be exactly where we needed to be." "You believe that?" "I didn't used to, but I'm learning." They went inside, and the door closed behind them. That evening, Marcus sat at Elena's small dining table, eating a simple meal of chicken and rice, while Sophia told him elaborate stories about her school and her friends and the adventures of Mr. Trumpets. It was such a normal scene, so ordinary and domestic, that Marcus found himself almost unable to process it. For so long he had lived in a world of extremes, of violence and danger and the constant presence of death. The quiet rhythms of civilian life had felt alien to him, disconnected from the person he had been trained to be. But sitting here, in this small apartment that had almost been destroyed, with this woman and child who had almost been broken, Marcus began to understand something he hadn't grasped before. The purpose he had been searching for wasn't going to come from some grand mission or dramatic cause. It was going to come from moments like this, from small acts of connection and kindness, from being present for the people who needed him. He had spent 18 years learning how to protect people through force of arms. Now he was learning how to protect them through force of will, through showing up, through refusing to look away when he saw injustice. It wasn't the same as being a SEAL. Nothing would ever be the same as that. But maybe that was okay. Maybe this was what coming home actually meant, not finding a replacement for what you'd lost, but finding a new way to use what you'd gained. After dinner, Sophia insisted that Marcus read her a bedtime story. He sat on the edge of her bed, feeling awkward and enormous in the small room surrounded by stuffed animals, and read from a book of fairy tales that Eleanor handed him. The story was about a knight who defeated a dragon to save a village. It was simple and predictable, good triumphing over evil in the way that fairy tales always promised. When he finished, Sophia looked up at him with serious eyes. "Mr. Marcus, are you like the knight in the story?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I don't know. I try to help people when I can. But real life isn't like fairy tales. Sometimes the dragons win." Sophia shook her head firmly. "Not when knights like you are around." Marcus felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. "Thank you, Sophia. That's very kind. Mom says you saved us. She says you're a hero." "Your mom is pretty heroic herself. She stood up to some very scary people to protect you and your home." Sophia nodded, accepting this as obvious fact. "Mum's the bravest person in the whole world. But you're brave too." She yawned, her eyes starting to droop. "Will you come back and visit us again?" "I'll come back," Marcus promised, "as often as you want." "Good." Sophia closed her eyes. Mr. Trumpets clutched tightly against her chest. "Good night, Mr. Marcus." "Good night, Sophia." He left the room quietly, closing the door behind him. In the living room, Elena was curled up on the couch, a cup of tea in her hands. "She likes you," Elena said. "She's a great kid. You've done an amazing job with her." Elena shrugged, but Marcus could see the pride in her eyes. "She deserves better than what I can give her. A bigger apartment, better schools, more opportunities. She has a mother who loves her and fights for her. That's worth more than any of those things." Elena was quiet for a moment. "You really believe that?" "I've seen kids grow up with every advantage in the world who turned out empty and cruel because no one ever really cared about them. And I've seen kids from the hardest circumstances become extraordinary people because someone believed in them." Marcus sat down in the chair across from her. "Sophia is lucky to have you, don't doubt that." They talked for another hour about nothing in particular, the easy conversation of people who had been through something difficult together and come out the other side. When Marcus finally stood to leave, Elena walked him to the door. "Thank you for tonight," she said. "It was nice to feel normal for a while." "Yeah, it was." Elena hesitated, then reached out and took his hand. "I know you're still figuring things out, what comes next for you, where you belong. But I want you to know that you belong here too, with us, as a friend, as family, as whatever you need." Marcus felt that unfamiliar warmth in his chest again, that sense of connection that had been absent from his life for so long. "I appreciate that, more than I can say." "Then say you'll come back, not because you feel obligated, but because you want to." "I want to." Elena smiled and released his hand. "Then I'll see you soon." Marcus drove home through the quiet Portland streets, past the buildings that Ashworth had planned to demolish, past the communities that had come together to save their neighborhood. The city lights reflected off low clouds, creating an orange glow that seemed to embrace the entire skyline. When he got back to his apartment, he sat by the window looking out at the train yards and thought about the strange journey that had brought him here. A chance encounter in a grocery store, a moment of instinctive action, and suddenly his life had meaning again. He had come home 3 years ago, lost and searching. He hadn't found what he was looking for. Instead, he had found something else entirely. A community that needed him, a family that welcomed him, a fight worth fighting. It wasn't the life he had planned. It wasn't the purpose he had imagined. But it was real, and it was his, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Marcus Thompson felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. In the apartment building on Morrison Street, Elena tucked a blanket around her sleeping daughter and stood for a moment watching her breathe. Outside the window, the city hummed with its usual nocturnal symphony, cars passing, distant sirens, the endless pulse of urban life. She thought about the man who had appeared in her life so unexpectedly, who had changed everything by simply refusing to look away. She thought about the future that now stretched ahead of her, uncertain but full of possibility. And she thought about the question Sophia had asked that night after the break-in, the question that had haunted her for days afterward. Do good guys ever win? Tonight, Elena knew the answer. Yes, baby, she whispered to her sleeping daughter. Sometimes they do. 6 months after the city council hearings that had brought down Richard Ashworth's empire, Marcus Thompson found himself standing in a place he had never expected to be. The front of a community center classroom, facing a group of teenagers who looked at him with varying degrees of skepticism and curiosity. The program was called Second Chances, and it was designed to help at-risk youth avoid the paths that led to prison, addiction, or worse. Patricia Chen had connected Marcus with the organization after learning about his military background and his instinct for mentoring. I never said I was good with kids, Marcus had protested when she first suggested it. You were good with Sophia, Patricia pointed out. And these aren't kids. They're young adults who have been failed by every institution that was supposed to help them. They need someone who can show them a different way of being. So here he was, standing in front of 12 teenagers who had been mandated to the program by various courts and social services, trying to figure out how to reach them. My name is Marcus Thompson, he began. And I'm here because someone once gave me a chance when I thought I didn't deserve one. A kid in the back, maybe 17 with a gang tattoo on his neck, snorted. What do you know about not deserving chances? You look like a cop. I'm not a cop. I was a Navy SEAL for 18 years. That got their attention. Even the skeptical kid in the back straightened up slightly. But that's not why I'm here, Marcus continued. I'm here because 3 years ago, I came home from the military and I was lost. I didn't know who I was without a mission, without a purpose. I spent years drifting, angry, disconnected from everyone and everything. He paused, looking around the room. Then I saw someone being treated badly, and I stepped in. Not because I'm a hero, but because I couldn't not step in, and that one moment changed my life. So what, you want us to be heroes? Another kid asked, a girl with dyed black hair and eyes that had seen too much. No, I want you to understand that one choice, one moment, can change everything, for better or for worse. Marcus sat down on the edge of the desk at the front of the room. You're all here because of choices you made. Some of those choices were bad. Some of them were made because you didn't see any other options. But every day is a new chance to make different choices. Easy for you to say, the kid with the tattoo muttered. You probably never had to steal to eat. You're right, I didn't. I had a family, a support system, opportunities you didn't have, and that's not fair. Marcus met the kid's eyes directly. But here's what I learned in the military. You can't control your circumstances. You can only control how you respond to them. The question isn't whether life is fair, the question is what you're going to do about it. The conversation that followed was difficult and raw and real. The kids shared their stories, some of them, the ones they were willing to tell. Marcus listened without judgment, asking questions, pushing back gently when their excuses became too easy. By the end of the session, something had shifted. Not a miracle, not a transformation, but a small crack in the walls these kids had built around themselves. Same time next week? Marcus asked as they filed out. The kid with the tattoo, whose name turned out to be Marcus as well, though everyone called him Junior, stopped at the door. Yeah, same time next week. It was a small victory, but small victories were how you built something lasting. Over the following months, Marcus settled into a new rhythm of life. He continued working with the Second Chances program, expanding his role as more kids were referred to his group. He became a regular presence at Elena's apartment, sharing meals, helping Sophia with homework, being part of a family in a way he hadn't experienced since his own childhood. He also began working with Patricia Chen's organization in a more official capacity, providing security consultations and sometimes physical protection for community organizers who faced threats similar to what Elena had experienced. The work was meaningful and often dangerous, but it gave him purpose. And slowly, hesitantly, he began to open up about his own experiences. The nightmares that still woke him some nights. The guilt he carried from operations that had gone wrong. The faces of friends who hadn't made it home. "You should talk to someone professional about this," Elena told him one evening. They were sitting on her small balcony, watching the sun set over the city. "A therapist, maybe, someone trained to help with this kind of thing." "I know, I've thought about it." Marcus sighed. "In the military, we were taught that mental health issues were weakness, that real warriors just push through. I know that's wrong, but unlearning it is hard." "The bravest thing you can do is admit when you need help," Eleanor said. "Isn't that what you tell the kids in your program?" Marcus had to smile at having his own words thrown back at him. "You're getting too good at this. I learn from the best." He did eventually find a therapist, a woman named Dr. Ayana Morrison, who specialized in working with veterans. The process was slow and painful, dredging up memories and emotions he had buried deep. But with each session, Marcus felt a little lighter, a little more capable of living fully in the present rather than being haunted by the past. A year after the incident at Peterson's grocery, the Portland community gathered for a celebration. The Morrison Street neighborhood had been formally designated a historic preservation district, protecting it from future development schemes. The affordable housing organization that had purchased the buildings was announcing major renovations that would improve living conditions without displacing current residents. Marcus stood in the crowd, watching as Elena took the stage to speak. She had become a prominent voice in the community, her work with Patricia's organization growing into a full-time position as an outreach coordinator. The frightened woman who had been pushed to the ground in a grocery store had transformed into a confident advocate who inspired others to find their own voices. "1 year ago," Elena began, "I was just trying to survive. Just trying to keep a roof over my daughter's head and food on the table. I didn't believe that standing up for myself would make any difference." She looked out at the crowd, her eyes finding Marcus. "Then someone showed me that I was wrong. That one person standing up can inspire others. That collective action can overcome even the most powerful opposition." Elena smiled. "I'm not going to pretend the fight is over. There are developers eyeing other neighborhoods, other communities facing the same threats we faced. But today we celebrate a victory, not to rest on our laurels, but to remind ourselves that victory is possible." The applause that followed was thunderous. Marcus found himself cheering along with everyone else, caught up in the moment. After the speeches, there was food and music and the kind of celebration that brought a community together. Sophia ran through the crowd with her friends, laughing and playing, while the adults talked and reminisced about the battles they had fought. "Hey, stranger." Derek Williams appeared at Marcus's elbow, a cup of punch in his hand. "Some party, huh? Not bad for a bunch of ordinary people who refuse to be pushed around. Nothing ordinary about what you all did." Derek took a sip of his punch. "By the way, I've been meaning to tell you, my story about the Ashworth case is being published as part of an anthology, investigative journalism that made a difference or something like that. You're going to be in a book. I didn't do anything. The community did it. The community needed someone to show them it was possible. That was you." Derek clapped him on the shoulder. "Accept the credit, man. You earned it." As the sun set over Portland, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Marcus found Eleanor standing apart from the crowd, watching Sophia play. "Hell of a year," he said, standing beside her. "Hell of a year," she agreed. "Sometimes I still can't believe it happened. Any of it." "Which part?" "All of it. The grocery store, the threats, the fight, the victory." She turned to look at him. meeting you. I was just in the right place at the right time. You were exactly where you needed to be." Elena reached out and took his hand. "And so was I." They stood together, watching the celebration continue around them. The music played on, children laughed, and a community that had learned to stand together enjoyed a moment of Marcus peace. Thought about the long road that had brought him here, the years of war, the difficult transition to civilian life, the search for meaning that had seemed endless. He had found what he was looking for in the most unexpected place, not on a battlefield or in some grand mission, but in a grocery store checkout line standing up for a stranger. That was the thing about purpose, he realized. You couldn't always see it coming. Sometimes it found you when you least expected it, disguised as an ordinary moment that turned out to be anything but. "So what now?" Elena asked softly. Marcus looked at her, at Sophia playing in the distance, at the community that had become his home. "Now we keep going. One day at a time, one fight at a time, one small victory at a time." "That sounds about right." Elena leaned her head against his shoulder, and Marcus felt a peace settle over him that he had never expected to find. The road ahead was uncertain, full of challenges and obstacles he couldn't yet foresee, but for the first time in longer than he could remember, he faced it without fear, because he knew now that he wasn't alone. He had a family, a community, a purpose, and he had something he thought he had lost forever when he left the military, a reason to keep fighting, not for glory or recognition, not for a flag or a cause, for the people who needed someone to stand up for them, for the quiet heroism of ordinary moments, for the belief that good guys could win if only they were willing to try. The party continued late into the evening, but eventually the crowds thinned and the music faded. Elena took Sophia home, both of them exhausted but happy. Marcus offered to walk them, as he often did now, and they made their way through the familiar streets of the neighborhood they had fought to save. When they reached the apartment building, Sophia hugged Marcus tight before running inside. "Good night, Mr. Marcus. Come back tomorrow." "I'll be here," he promised. Elena lingered at the door, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for today, for this year, for all of it. You don't have to keep thanking me." "I know, but I want to." She smiled, and in that smile, Marcus saw the woman she had become. Strong, confident, unafraid. "See you tomorrow?" Tomorrow. He walked home alone, but he didn't feel alone. The streets were quiet, the night air cool and clean. Above him, stars began to emerge as the city lights faded. Marcus Thompson had spent his life preparing for war, fighting war, and trying to recover from war. He had seen the worst of humanity and the best. He had lost friends and gained scars, both visible and invisible. But standing in that grocery store, facing down a bully who thought his money made him untouchable, Marcus had discovered something that all his training had never taught him. The most important battles aren't fought with weapons. They're fought with courage, compassion, and the stubborn refusal to accept injustice. They're won not by warriors, but by ordinary people who choose to stand up. And sometimes the strongest thing a man can do is not throw a punch, but extend a hand. Marcus reached his apartment as the clock struck midnight. He stood at the window, looking out at the city he had chosen to make his home, and felt grateful for the strange, winding path that had brought him here. Tomorrow, there would be more challenges, more battles to fight, more people who needed help. But tomorrow was tomorrow. Tonight, Marcus Thompson was exactly where he was supposed to be. The end of this chapter was just the beginning of another. And for the first time in years, he was looking forward to seeing what came next. The winter holidays came and went, bringing with them a warmth that had nothing to do with the weather. Marcus spent Christmas Eve with Elena and Sophia, decorating a small tree and exchanging modest gifts. He had gotten Sophia a set of adventure books, and she had made him a card that said "World's Best Hero" in crayon letters that wavered slightly but were filled with earnest affection. New Year's Eve found them on Elena's small balcony again, watching fireworks explode over the city skyline. The explosions reminded Marcus of other nights, other skies lit by different kinds of fire, but the memories were softer now, less sharp-edged, more like echoes than wounds. "Got any resolutions?" Elena asked as the clock struck midnight. "Keep doing what I'm doing. Help the kids in my program. Be there for the people who need me." He paused, considering. "Learn to make that lasagna you keep promising to teach me." Elena laughed. "That can be arranged. What else? I don't know. Maybe try to be a little less hard on myself. Accept that I can't fix everything. That's a good one." The new year brought new challenges, as years always did. The Second Chances program expanded, requiring Marcus to train additional mentors to meet the growing demand. Some of the kids he worked with made progress, turning their lives around in ways that amazed everyone who knew them. Others struggled, falling back into old patterns, and Marcus had to learn to accept that not every battle could be won. Junior, the kid with the gang tattoo who had been so hostile in that first meeting, became one of the program's success stories. He got his GED, found a job at a local auto shop, and started dating a girl who worked at the community center. When Marcus ran into him a year after their first meeting, Junior pulled him into a hug. "You saved my life, man," Junior said, and there were tears in his eyes. "I was headed nowhere good. You showed me there was another way." "You saved your own life," Marcus replied. "I just helped you see it was possible." It was a lesson he was still learning himself. As the months passed, Marcus's role in the community continued to grow. He became known as someone who would show up when needed, whether it was to help a family facing eviction, to mediate a dispute between neighbors, or simply to lend a hand when times were tough. He wasn't a social worker or a police officer or any other official title. He was just Marcus, the guy who had stood up to a bully in a grocery store and somehow sparked a movement. The Ashworth trial, when it finally came, was a sensation. Richard Ashworth was convicted on multiple counts of bribery, witness intimidation, and fraud. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, and his remaining assets were seized to pay restitution to the communities his company had harmed. Marcus attended the sentencing, sitting in the back of the courtroom with Eleanor and Patricia Chen. When the judge handed down the verdict, there was no celebration, just a quiet sense of justice finally served. "Does it feel good?" Elena asked afterward as they walked out of the courthouse. Marcus considered the question. "It feels necessary, but not good exactly. A lot of people were hurt before anyone stopped him. That doesn't just go away because he's behind bars." "No," Elena agreed, "but maybe it makes it a little easier for the next community that faces someone like him. They'll know it's possible to fight back and win. Maybe." They walked in silence for a while, and then Elena asked, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't been in that grocery store that night?" "Sometimes." Marcus shook his head slowly. "But you can drive yourself crazy thinking about what-ifs. The truth is, I was there, and I made a choice. Everything that came after flowed from that one moment that changed everything. That's what moments do, whether we realize it or not." Summer arrived, bringing long days and warm evenings. Sophia finished 3rd grade with a ceremony that involved singing and awards, and Marcus sat in the audience with Elena, feeling an odd pride in a child who wasn't his, but who had somehow become part of his life. Afterwards, Sophia ran up to him, waving a certificate for Most Improved Reader. "Mr. Marcus, look, I got an award." "I see that. That's amazing, Sophia. I'm so proud of you. Mom says we're getting ice cream to celebrate. Will you come with us?" Marcus looked at Elena, who nodded with a smile. "I'd love to." They walked to the ice cream shop. Sophia chattering between them about her plans for the summer, about the books she wanted to read, about 100 different topics that jumped from one to the next in the way of excited children everywhere. At the shop, they sat at a small table by the window, eating their cones and watching the world go by. It was such a simple moment, so perfectly ordinary, that Marcus found himself memorizing every detail: the way the sunlight fell through the glass, the sound of Sophia's laughter, the feeling of being part of something larger than himself. "Penny for your thoughts?" Elena asked, just thinking about how strange life is. A year and a half ago, I was lost, alone, convinced I would never find a place where I belonged. And now? Marcus looked at her, at Sophia, at the neighborhood visible through the window. Now I'm home. Elena reached across the table and took his hand. Yes, you are. The days that followed blurred together in the best possible way. There were challenges, of course. There always were, but they were the kind of challenges that come with a life fully lived, work that mattered, relationships that deepened, a community that grew stronger. Marcus kept working with the Second Chances program, watching kids transform their lives the way Junior had. He kept protecting those who needed protection. Though the threats were smaller now, less dramatic than those first terrifying weeks after the grocery store incident, he kept showing up day after day, building something lasting through the accumulation of small acts. And through it all, Elena and Sophia were constants in his life. Dinner became a regular occurrence, then a nightly ritual. Weekends were spent together, exploring the city, taking trips to the coast, simply being a family in all the ways that mattered. One evening, almost 2 years after the night that had started it all, Marcus and Elena sat on her balcony watching the sun set. Sophia was inside doing homework, her voice occasionally drifting out as she talked to herself through a particularly tricky math problem. "I've been thinking," Elena said, breaking a comfortable silence. "That sounds serious." She smiled, but there was something thoughtful in her expression. About us, about what this is. Marcus's heart beat a little faster. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Elena turned to face him fully. "We've been doing this dance for almost 2 years now. Dinner every night, weekends together. You being here for Sophia like a father. I'm not trying to replace her father. I know, and she knows, but Marcus..." Elena's eyes were bright with emotion. "She doesn't remember her father. She was 2 when he left. The only father figure she's ever known is you." Marcus didn't know what to say, so he stayed silent, letting her continue. "I'm not asking for anything," Elena said quickly. "I'm not trying to pressure you. I need to know what this is, what we're building, because Sophia asks me sometimes if you're going to stay, and I don't know what to tell her." Marcus looked out at the city, thinking about the question and what it meant. He had spent so long guarding himself, keeping his distance from the kind of commitment Elena was talking about. It was safer that way, easier to walk away if things fell apart. But looking at his life now, at everything he had built since that night in the grocery store, he realized that walking away wasn't what he wanted anymore. Maybe it never had been. "I'm not going anywhere," he said finally. "Not unless you want me to." "I don't want you to." "Then I'll stay." He turned to face her, taking her hands in his. "I don't know exactly what this is, Elena. I'm still figuring out who I am outside of combat, outside of the military. But I know that who I am now is better because of you and Sophia. You gave me a reason to keep going when I didn't have one. You showed me what I was fighting for." Elena's eyes were shining with tears. "You showed me the same thing. Then let's keep showing each other, one day at a time." She nodded, and then she kissed him, soft and tentative and full of promise. When they pulled apart, Sophia's voice drifted out from inside. "Mommy, can you help me with this problem? I don't understand fractions." Elena laughed, wiping her eyes. "Duty calls. Go! I'll clean up out here." As Eleanor went inside, Marcus stood on the balcony alone for a moment, looking out at the city that had become his home. The lights were coming on as darkness fell, a million small points of illumination against the gathering night. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. The years of war, the search for meaning, the chance encounter that had changed everything. He thought about the people he had lost along the way and the people he had found, and he felt for the first time he could remember completely at peace. Not because life was perfect or because all his problems were solved, but because he knew, finally, who he was and why he was here. He was a protector, a mentor, a friend, a partner, and maybe someday something more. A man who had learned that true strength wasn't about force, but about showing up again and again for the people who needed you. Marcus Thompson had gone to war and come back broken. But in the broken places, light had found its way in. And in that light, he had built something new. Something worth fighting for. Something worth staying for. Something that felt, at long last, like home. The stars emerged overhead, distant and eternal, as they had every night since the beginning of time. Marcus watched them for a while, thinking about all the people throughout history who had looked up at those same stars, each of them carrying their own burdens, fighting their own battles, searching for their own peace. Then he went inside, where his family was waiting, and closed the door behind him on the darkness outside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to make a difference. But tomorrow was tomorrow. Tonight, Marcus was exactly where he needed to be. And that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.